Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
This meeting of the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission will come to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the meeting of November 6, 2019. You've had a chance, I believe, all of you to review those minutes. Are there any comments, or I would entertain a motion to approve?
I would so move.
I'll second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the meeting of November 6. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Moving to old business. Item A, formal recommendation number 8 by Joe Kirby to Charter Section 2.11, require a vote of at least 6 members of the City Council to issue any bonds.
Mr. Chair, I would recuse myself on this matter.
Thank you.
For the previous reason.
So noted. So we now have 4 sitting members of the Charter Revision Commission to issue a vote. I would remind the members of the commission that it takes a vote of at least 4 of our 5 members to put anything onto the ballot. So we will move to consideration of this item. I will defer to any member of the commission if you have an objection. Otherwise, I would entertain input from the public on item A under old business first. Is there any public input? Seeing none, I would entertain questions, comments, discussion from the members of the commission on item A, formal recommendation number 8. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on formal recommendation number 8, either to place onto the 2020 ballot or to reject. Or some other motion.
Well, I will, so that we can have it out there for discussion, I will put a motion out there to move that item forward to a ballot. That would be that would take 6 members to issue debt.
Supported.
Okay, so that's a second. So we have a motion and a second to place formal recommendation number 8 onto the 2020 ballot. Discussion on that motion.
Yeah, I guess if I could, that when we look at certain elections that are out there that would require a 60% vote versus a 51% vote, I would see it similar here, that it is, realizing the danger is that we currently have 9 voting members. That means 4 could block things on that, but it would, that even at 3, if it's a 6-3 board on the votes, an item could still move forward on that. I think the clarification would be, does that 6 include the mayor or does it exclude the mayor? Because if it was 6 of the 8 or 6 out of the 9 would make a significant difference.
I can
clarify for that, there are 8 voting members of the city council. So by charter, the mayor just breaks ties, and so you would have, and so the mayor is not one of the regular voting members of the council.
So that means that at a 5-3 vote, a bond would not pass if we were to do this. It would have to be a 6-2 vote.
That is my understanding of the recommendation. So it requires 6 affirmative votes in favor in order for something to pass. So the tiebreaker becomes largely irrelevant at that point.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zylstra?
that really raises my main concern with this. I do see value in a supermajority in issuing bonds. Traditionally, the reason for a supermajority in issuing bonds has been, as I understand it, that what you are doing is taxing future generations. You're not just passing an expenditure of the current generation, you're taxing future and tying the hands of future councils, future mayors. And therefore, having a supermajority makes some sense to me. I am not sure that the 75% as specified in this proposal is in keeping with the spirit of our charter. Our charter balances, as Mr. Kirby has pointed out to us and others have pointed out, balances the strong mayor and the strong city council. The idea would be that we want to be able to move forward with aggressive leadership, but we also want to be able to have strong reflective consideration as we move forward. To me, this tips the balance from that to the possibility that, as Commissioner Timian has pointed out, 3 people could block this and could keep things, 3 people, when the mayor and 5 others are in favor of it, 3 could keep it from moving forward. So I really have a hesitation about moving it to the ballot as written because of the, for want of a better term, super duper majority that is specified in this proposal. And while I am willing to listen to different counsel from the other commissioners before we vote, at this point I have an inclination not to move it to the ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Zylstra. Mr. Timian?
Yes, I think with that clarification that we're talking 6 of 8 versus 6 of 9, I'm looking at that currently then it is that on a 4-4 vote, the mayor can cast the tying vote. And I'm wondering if we were to look at that language and look at it as 5 of the 8, it would be a majority of the council and the mayor could not break the tie on a bond issue, is basically what it would come down to. And I am wondering if the intent of having more than a simple majority, when we look at 5 out of 8, that's 62%. The 6 out of 8 is 75%. And that 75% seems to be an item where a minority, a very small group, can keep the city from moving forward. But at 5-3, what it means is it can't be just a 4-4 with a tiebreaker to do it. And so I would offer a proposal to the language there and from 6 members of the council to that 5 of the 8 voting members to pass a bond issue. That would be my revised motion, 5 of the 8.
I'll support that amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to amend the main motion to change the formal recommendation number 8 from Joe Kirby to Charter Section 2.11 to require at least 5 of the 8 voting members of the City Council to vote in favor of issuing any bonds. And further discussion on that motion?
Well, again, if I could, I will say that I think it addresses the concerns. It is not overly burdensome. And to some extent, that is the same as the 6 out of the 9 or 5 out of the 8, because normally you'd look at a bond issue like that would have the support of the mayor forward on that. But it's I would look at that, that I think it's a step towards that. Make sure that the majority of the people representing where we're at on the policy, the legislative side of the city, are in favor of the bond issue. And that a 50-50 amongst that group is not adequate.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, this is a motion not to place on the ballot, but instead to amend the motion on formal recommendation number 8 to change it to requiring at least 5 of the 8 voting members of the City Council to issue any bonds. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. The motion is so amended. The motion now before us is whether or not to place on the 2020 ballot formal recommendation number 8 to require at least 5 of the 8 voting members of the Sioux Falls City Council to vote in favor of issuance of any bonds. Further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I have a couple of comments that I'll offer. Some of them are similar to Mr. Zylstra's comments, which I appreciate on this issue. I think I have concerns with the low amount of information that we've received on the implications of this proposal. We have heard from the initial proposer, Mr. Kirby. I can't remember if Ms. Brecky spoke directly on this one or not. Okay, I was pretty sure. But I don't recall that the commission has heard a great deal from the balance of the commission, of the City Council on the implications of this. I also have some concerns with the fact that there's no minimums put in place for the bonds that would be issued by the City Council. One of the prior proposals, and it may have been from, the gentleman whose name is going to elude me at this point, Mr. Mathias, if it was a bond of a substantial amount or a significant amount or some type of threshold, whether it be monetary or otherwise, on the bonds, to require that vote of 5 out of 8 voting members. So I don't know what the implications would be of saying that threshold vote must be met for every single bond, no matter the size. What the implications would be for economic development in the city and our city programs. Coming forward, this is, again, like so many of the other proposals this term, this is coming forward based on dissatisfaction with decisions on prior bonds made by the Sioux Falls City Council. Those were political decisions, and the votes were made by elected officials. Definitely in the testimony that was offered by the public and the proposer of this amendment, those political decisions were cited as the reasoning why this change to the charter should be made. The council has the ability to propose an amendment to section 2.11 of the charter on its own and place that on the ballot. That's not one of the sections that they are prohibited from amending. They could also adopt an ordinance requiring that 5 of the 8 voting members or 6 of the members of the city council have to vote in favor of issuing any bond if they so desire. And then they can self-limit doing that. This was not put into the original charter. There was no limitation on the ability of the city council to place items on the ballot for greater than a majority vote. And I also think we need to recognize again the fact that there's a pending ballot measure that would also make this change. Unless I'm mistaken, that's one of the pieces of the ballot measure that's out there. So I have some serious concerns with, particularly given the lack of information on the implications that this would bring about. And so for that reason, I will be opposing the motion to put this on the 2020 ballot. Further discussion? Seeing none, we will vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to place this on the 2020 ballot, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion fails for lack of the 4 out of 5 members of the commission voting in favor. We now need a motion to formally reject formal recommendation number 8, because the motion to put it on the ballot has failed.
Mr. Chairman, have we used the motion withhold action or take no action?
We did, and the direction that came from the city clerk's and/or city attorney's office was they need some definitive action, either yay, put it on the ballot, or nay, reject it.
And
Or defer to a future meeting.
With it not being able to move forward to move to the ballot, then I think it is only appropriate that we reject it if it does not have the votes to move forward to the ballot.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion to reject.
Okay, motion by Mr. Timian to reject this recommendation.
I second.
Second by Ms. Politis. Any discussion?
Raise a
Mr. Zoustra.
point of order. I'm looking at our list, our spreadsheet. Number 6, it says we declined action. Item number 6 on plurality voting for election of a member of the city council.
And I would have to go back and look at our minutes from that meeting. That may have been before we got the direction that we need to either reject or place on the ballot. And if we need to clean that up at our final meeting in January, we can do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the motion before us is to reject formal recommendation number 8 to Charter Section 2.11. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. On to old business item B, formal recommendation number 9 by Joe Kirby to Charter Section 6.01, inserting language that would allow for the adoption of ranked choice voting. Thank you, Mr. Zoustra, for bringing out Ms. Hayek. I will open it up to public input on item B, formal recommendation number 9, language allowing for the adoption of ranked choice voting. Any commentary from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to discussion, questions, action from the members of the commission on formal recommendation number 9.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Zoustra.
as an inquiry first, what specific language are we addressing here? Because I believe in the...
It's in the packet. It's its own separate, oh no, that's the...
Yeah, see, there was more than one, and I want to make sure we know. I thought because of the reference to 6.01, it's just that line, except when the city exercises its home rule powers under.
No.
The other reference,
Oh, here we go. On your screen, right here.
yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
That's what I was reading, except the underlined and where the arrow is pointing. Is that what we're talking about?
No, I don't believe so. I'm going to look through my binder here. We'll be at ease for just a moment.
It's actually, I think there's a typo on there. It's
2.02, okay.
and that's up there.
Okay, yep. So it's actually just a typo in the agenda. It's section 2.02. You'll see it on the screen. Election of city council members shall be decided by a plurality vote unless the city adopts ranked choice voting. At this time, I believe we have already rejected the plurality voting proposal. Is that correct?
Declined action.
That was the one on which we declined action. Okay. So we declined to take any action on that item. So this would be, I would assume, some type of language would be added to section 2.02 of the charter that would make it clear that the city has the power to adopt ranked choice voting. Or adding that recognition to some section of our Sioux Falls City Charter. So we would just need a motion to add to our charter some type of language allowing the city to adopt ranked choice voting or recognizing that right of the city. Or a motion to reject this recommendation. Mr. Zylstra.
Mr. Chairman, to facilitate discussion, I will move that we adopt language permitting, specifying the power of the city to implement ranked choice voting.
We have a motion. Is there a second? All right, seeing none, that motion fails for lack of a second. Do we have a motion to reject formal recommendation
Mr. Chair,
number 9?
I would make the motion to reject.
Okay. We have a motion by Ms. Hayek to reject formal recommendation number 9. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Ms. Politis. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Zylstra.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to make a nuisance of myself, I hope, but I would have voted against the last motion. But I'm wondering, and I told both the clerk and the attorney I was going to raise this question. Is there anything in the current charter, in state home rule acts, or ordinance by the city that would forbid the city from adopting ranked choice voting? In other words, is this even necessary?
I mean, at this point, the vote is to reject 9. I mean, if there's an academic exercise associated with whether it's possible or not, I don't know that that's instructive for this particular line item here. And so in some respects, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. And I think you had mentioned a previous question that you had posed to the clerk and to me, but on this one, are you asking if this, well, I guess in relation to the existing motion, I'm not sure what you're asking.
Mr. Chairman, to remove it from our consideration, this may not be directly pertinent. However, for the interest of those who brought this forward to know what we are rejecting, if we reject this, does that mean that the city cannot, by ordinance, implement ranked choice voting?
What it means if this is rejected is that this commission did not accept what they proposed. I would also add, if you are asking on behalf of those who brought this forward, and I would note that this indicates that Mr. Kirby brought this in July of 2019 and hasn't been present since. And so it's difficult for me to provide legal advice or give you a legal opinion on a question that the proponents may or may not have. But with the motion that's here in front of us to reject this, I guess I'm not in a situation to say whether the law allows this. As I sit here right now, I'm inclined to believe that this would be legal if it would be passed. That being said, I'm not sure it's really ripe at this point, to borrow a legal term.
Mr. Timian.
But at the same time, if, just as the council had went to changing how the plurality worked for voting, could do the same thing with ranked choice. If they wanted to put that on put it out there, they could.
I don't know of anything in the charter that would prevent that, but I'll be the first to admit that I'm not familiar with every single ordinance in the city of Sioux Falls.
By us not placing it on there doesn't mean it couldn't get placed either on the ballot or changed.
That's absolutely right. The Sioux Falls City Council would still have the authority to amend the charter to put something into the charter regarding ranked choice voting. Further discussion on the motion to reject? Seeing none, all those in favor of rejecting formal recommendation number 9 on ranked choice voting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. On to old business, item C, formal recommendation number 11 by Carl Zalstra to Charter Section 8.01D, address petition signature requirements to align the charter with the requirements set forth in the state constitution. I will allow you first dibs on this, Mr. Zalstra, and then we'll open it up to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I do also have an inquiry here, and I think I know the answer to this, but I think it's important that be on the table. From, Commissioner Koistra, who is also our legal advisor, does this language, adding to the charter or the number of signatures required by state law, whichever is greater, does that change, now I don't know the legal term here, the current state of affairs? Or is that actually what the current state of affairs is?
Some of that is fact dependent. I mean, at this point, and Assistant City Attorney Charlotte Swenis is here, but I'll take a whack at this first and she can correct me if I'm wrong. But factually speaking, as we sit here today, based on the population numbers, this language wouldn't change the thresholds as we sit here. What this would do is, in effect, ensure that state law is always minded which must control by state constitution. And that way it would take any analysis out of the city attorney's office as to which threshold applies. Because again, you can't rule out, well, for example, at the time that this was passed, that those would have been flip-flopped. And at this point, we can't rule out that that would be the case in the future. So this is basically what this language does, is it ensures that per state law, whatever is the most stringent is what applies. Would you agree with that? That's a yes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, then if I may simply speak to the question of if in fact this is the state of affairs that governs the submission of petitions seeking to amend, why put it in the charter? Because it wouldn't necessarily have to be in the charter. But let me say why I think it should be in the charter. Because as I understand it, from looking, at least if the news media that I saw were accurate, earlier this year, there were people who began, citizens who began in good faith an effort to amend the city charter. They went, sought the appropriate forms from the city clerk's office and began their effort. And at that point, according to the public media, they thought that the language in the charter of the 5% of registered voters was their target for signatures. I understand also from the media that the clerk and the city attorney informed them that in the current situation this year, there is a more stringent application that has to be considered, and that's the state constitution, which says 10% of the number in the last gubernatorial election. According to the media, again, accounts, that got people kind of upset because they had thought they were reading the charter in good faith, and it sounded to them like somebody was changing the rules in the middle of the game, which of course you weren't, as you've explained, but it sounded like it because it wasn't clear. And it seems to me the city charter should be clear and transparent so that anybody who wants to launch a petition drive does not have to do a search of the state constitution to see if there's something there that might override this. If it's right there, then they could simply either do the research themselves and apply 10% of the gubernatorial versus 5% of registered voters, see which is more stringent, and they would know it, or they could simply ask you, but they would know that you were responding, and I refer to both the clerk and the attorney, you're both responding in good faith. So I think we ought to get this language in the charter, so everybody, it is the current state of affairs. In general, I'm against putting things in the charter that don't change anything, but I think what it changes is the clarity of people to understand what their target is as they enter into a petition process, and it will create far more confidence in our city government, in our city officials, and a better sense of confidence in a petition drive that the rules are fair for everyone, they're open, they're above board, it's transparent. So I would, the language was drafted in transparency again by our city attorney in consultation with me, and I had also consulted with our chairman. And I think it's an excellent way of just making clear to people what the situation is. So that's the background. I think if we get it on the ballot, there are still going to be people who think we're trying to pull a fast one, but we are not. We're trying to be transparent, and I think it's worth the effort.
Ms. Hayek.
Thank you. I'm very confused. In my reading, and I'm going to see if maybe the attorney, as I look at what we have currently, and I'm not sure about the media, and I'm going to put the media out of here, just deal with our charter. It says that the petition shall contain or have attached thereto throughout their circulation the full text of the proposed charter amendment and must be signed by registered voters of the city in the number of at least 5% of the total number of registered voters at the last regular city election period. It is my understanding you would like to add the phrase or the number of signatures required by state law, whichever is greater. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then my question becomes, I believe it is a little bit onerous for the citizens of our city who are functioning under the charter that they voted on and chose, that we would actually require signatures related specifically to the electorate of the city and not rely upon the electorate of the entire state. And so I can't support making it harder for citizens of Sioux Falls to get things on the ballot.
Mr.
And
Chair.
if I'm mistaken, please correct me.
Mr. Zalstra.
Chairman, the reference is to the State of South Dakota Constitution, Article 9(2). Not less than 10% of those voting in the last preceding gubernatorial election in the affected jurisdiction may by petition initiate the question of whether to adopt or amend the charter. And then South Dakota Codified Law 612.5 says, neither charter nor ordinances adopted thereunder may set standards and requirements which are lower or less stringent than those imposed by state law. So it's not we who are asking to make this more stringent. The State of South Dakota Constitution already specifies it. The Home Rule Law says it has to be, it cannot be less stringent. And as I understood it, and now I'll defer to the people who really know what they're talking about, that was on that basis that you informed this group that they had to meet that larger, that higher standard.
Question, could we have the reference to the state constitution article that you are referring to? I see you've got it here.
It's in our,
I don't.
So in answer to your question, Ms. Hayek, if I can offer some clarification, when Mr. Zalstra and I looked at this and communicated by email, we're not we're not using a broader population base to calculate the number of petition signatures required here. We're still going to be basing this off of the population of Sioux Falls registered voters. However, in accordance with state law, which in this case would have precedence over the local laws on these issues, we are going, we have to abide by the minimum standards of the state level. So we would say, within the jurisdiction of the city of Sioux Falls, you have to have the minimum number of signatures based off of the last gubernatorial election. So those Sioux Falls city voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election, that would be the basis for calculating the minimum petition signatures under our charter. And that's how the law is currently. Putting this into the charter is not going to change our city laws because the state laws are going to trump. However, this is going to provide greater clarity to our residents the next time they come forward and want to place something on the ballot to amend the charter. While we're discussing and looking through some documents, I am going to open it up to the floor for any public input on formal recommendation 11, addressing the petition signature requirement to align the charter with state law. Ms. Brecky.
Janet Brecky, Sioux Falls City Council member. I've just been trying to follow the discussion and the proposed amendment, so I'm seeing this language for the first time. I had anticipated that there was going to be an amendment coming, from Commissioner Zykestra on this. The language is really confusing to me. I'm just wondering, I guess maybe my question's for the city attorney's office and you, the drafter, why it's just not 10%. Isn't that what it is? I mean, doesn't it change from 5 to 10%? Isn't that what the requirement is going to be?
Well, there are two different standards, and I don't know that you can rule out that, like, state law or the state constitution could be amended. So, the language that's been discussed is one that just ensures it's all compliant with state law. And if for some reason state law would change to reduce the threshold requirement, then you at least maintain the requirements of city ordinance at that point. So, you could put in, and it would not be illegal to put in the specific language of state law at this time, but you also can't rule out the fact that it could change. So,
well, I guess my testimony would be that, I disagree that state law trumps city charter. That's what home rule is all about, is that the city charter prevails. However, the Constitution, in a parallel article, trumps our charter. So I think all we have to do to fix this is just, and I think it should be clear in the charter what the percentage is. I mean, to basically put a phrase in the charter that doesn't, that doesn't tell the public what it is they're required to do and leaves it up in the air based on, some change in the Constitution that that's probably never going to happen or could happen years down the road. If the Constitution changes and it makes, something illegal in our charter, there'll have to be another amendment to change that. And I don't really see that happening. So I'm surprised. If I had more time, I'd try to draft up an alternative proposed amendment. I almost brought one forward, but I knew that it was in the works and it was coming, and I just really saw it as a simple change, just making it consistent with, the language in the state constitution, and which refers to state law, which is 10%, and just makes it clean and crisp, and people know what the requirement is. So that's my input. My input would be to just delete that and just put 10%.
Thank you, Ms. Brecky.
Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Brecky? Further public input on this formal recommendation? Seeing none, Ms. Hayek.
And may I say that now, having found the reference, and you are correct, you are correct, but I would scratch, as Councilmember Brecky said, we should just have it consistent with the state and use the exact language. And the 5% really, if we are following what is required by Home Rule Charter, that we cannot be less stringent than the state, then we shouldn't have the 5% in at all. And for whatever reason, this got missed by the original people that put this in.
So Ms. Hayek, are you proposing that we change the charter in section 8.01D to simply say, shall, signed by registered voters of the city in the number required by state law? Or do you want to put specific numbers into this section based on current state law?
Well, I thank Commissioner Zelstra for bringing this, but according to state law, quote, not less than 10% of those voting in the last preceding gubernatorial election in the affected jurisdiction. Now, therein may be the key, may by petition initiate the question of whether to adopt or amend a charter. So what we're talking about is not less than 10% of those voting in the last preceding gubernatorial election in the city of Sioux Falls.
Mm-hmm.
And so that language should be reflective, or, I mean, we can reference to state law, that the petitions must comply with the requirements of state law in regard to the number.
Mr. Zalstra?
That is certainly one of the thoughts I had, was simply to do that. This is actually a nod toward the drafters of the original charter, because don't forget, it's not a 5% or 10%. It's 5% of total registered voters at the last regular city election versus 10% of those actually voting in the last gubernatorial election. And I think the first time I brought this up, Commissioner Timian looked at that right away and said, well, there are times when the 5% is going to be more stringent than the 10%, depending on who voted in which election. Now, I agree, this makes it a lot more complicated, and I had kind of thought a simple solution would be to do exactly as Commissioner Hayek's saying, and just put in the language, the 10% of those voting in the last gubernatorial election within the city. But on reflection and in consultation also with the city attorney, we thought this was a way of leaving the actual requirement of the original drafters of the charter in there, and perhaps they do want it to be more stringent in certain situations than the state law allows or requires.
Would it be possible?
Ms. Hayek?
I'm sorry. Would it be possible to see what the actual numbers would be? In other words, what, 5% of the total number of registered voters at the last regular city election, how many was that? And I think those numbers must be fairly easily ascertained, or no?
They are, if you give me one moment.
I don't mean this second, I mean next meeting, or 10% of those voting in Sioux Falls in the last, governor's race.
Well, I can answer that. So in the last gubernatorial race, the number of voters voting was approximately 67,000. So 10% of that is about 6,700. And I don't remember the exact number voting in our last election, but I do recall, or the number of registered voters, but it was it comes out to a requirement of approximately 5,500 required signatures, and those are approximate. So as was pointed out there, you take into account total number of registered voters and those just voting.
Thank you.
But I guess I would look at that if we want to keep the two-part hurdle, that it would be either the 5% of the total number of registered voters at the last regular city election, and then I would put in, or 10% of the votes cast in the last governor's race in Sioux Falls. Because that would give us the number that you're talking about, the 5,500 and the 6,700. I think that's what people have the interest in. If they want to circulate a petition, is my hurdle 5,500 or 6,700? on that to know what that is, and they should be able to calculate it at that time. But I think rather than, I would be open to that one, that if state law changes, and then I would probably put or the 10% of those voted in the last governor's election per state law.
I agree with that, Mr. Chair. I think it would be better for those who are looking at carrying petitions, would give them a better guideline.
So, Mr. Timian, do you have specific language that you'd like to propose inserting or changing in Mr. Zylstra's proposal?
It would be or the number of signatures required by state law, and then I would put in there in a parent, not less than 10% of those voted in the last preceding gubernatorial election in the city of Sioux Falls. Close parent, whichever is greater.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Zylstra, or by, excuse me, Mr. Timian, seconded by Ms. Hayek to amend Mr. Zylstra's proposal to insert a parenthetical giving specific explanation of the state law petition requirements, making reference to the gubernatorial election voters. Any further discussion on that motion to amend? Ms. Hayek?
And this is in anticipation of what will go to the voters if this is approved by the city council to go on to the ballot. We essentially are telling the people that the charter will run by state law, which it has to do anyhow in regard to this. So although we've placed all this in there, it may be unnecessary language in the end run, but it is explanatory to the public. So I think it is important that they understand and know, because these things come up. However, people are going to be confused. They're going to say, well, golly, they change it, they're going to make it harder. And in truth, we're just explaining what the real requirement is, as you have said.
Mr. Timian?
Yeah, I think when that's as required by state law, and then put in the parent, what is the state law? So that when they're looking to circulate a petition, they can understand what the numbers are then. They can go get obtain what it is, do the math, and say, this is how many signatures they need, and they know it. They don't need to go in and research the state law and the Constitution as to what the requirement is.
All right.
Mr. Chair, one clarification, just, and I didn't necessarily catch it, but Ms. Hayek mentioned that it goes to the council. This does not go to the council. This goes to ballot.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay, I thought the council also had.
No. Direct placement on ballot.
Thank you.
I would offer just a quick comment on this motion to amend. Personally, I would prefer Mr. Zylstra's language without the parenthetical, and the reason is something that Ms. Brecky brought up during her testimony, and that is, particularly right now, issues of the ballot measure process, amendments to founding documents like this, these are big issues at the state level with our legislature, as well as our voters. And we've gone through a couple of rounds in the last several years of bills that have changed some of that law. So I think because there is the risk, as Ms. Brecky pointed out, that future charter revision commissions may not come back in and change it, or would have to go back in and change it based on every update to those laws, whether in the Constitution or statutes. I just think that puts more of a burden on there. Saying it like this, one of the comments that I was going to make just in the overall discussion is, the good news is we have a great city clerk staff who can easily get the two numbers pulled from our city records. I wrote that before he ever pulled that up, and he did it lightning fast, so it shows that they're clearly very capable, very well informed. I think it would be very easy for when a group of citizens comes forward the next time and asks for petitions to be issued, for them to get the guidance in a memo or a one-page document from the city clerk. Here's the standard for the numbers for the last gubernatorial election. Here's the standard for the numbers based on registered city voters. The more stringent standard applies, and therefore here's the number. Leaving it as Mr. Zylstra proposes it, as he pointed out, lends to the flexibility that if there is a change to state law, this can grow or, be flexible in response to that. So that's why I will be opposing the motion to amend. However, I will support either version of the proposal. So that's the comment I'll offer. Further discussion on the motion to amend? Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to amend Mr. Zalstra's proposal to add the parenthetical reference to specific explanation of state law signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay. The vote is 2-2, and therefore the motion to amend fails under Robert's rules. We're back to Mr. Zalstra's original proposal.
And I will second that.
Okay. So the motion has been made by Mr. Zalstra, seconded by Ms. Hayek, to amend the charter, section 8.01D, with the language indicated. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Well, first of all, let me offer a few quick comments. I think that this is a perfect example of what we discussed at the very beginning of this term of the Charter Revision Commission as the very purpose for which this commission was created. We studied an issue. We received input from local and legal authorities and from the public. We determined that this was consistent with the balance of the charter. We addressed a timely, non-political, and specific issue with the city charter to keep our founding document relevant and legally clear. And we had a real issue that arose that was non-political in nature, and it was something that caused consternation to a group of citizens who were trying to comply with the process as presented in our charter, which, as we discovered, since this was the very first time that citizens had taken out one of these petitions, that there was a lack of clarity based on state law preempting largely the local law on the number of signatures required. So I think that this is a very good result in the process, and again, in my opinion, the perfect example for the whole mission of the Charter Revision Commission. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. That will be placed on the 2020 ballot. Moving on to old business, item D, formal recommendation number 12 by Janet Brecky to Charter Section 2.01, adoption of a long-range strategic master plan created by the City Council. Since this was Ms. Brecky's proposal and we're taking public input first, I'd invite any members of the public to come forward, starting with Ms. Brecky.
Thank you, Councilmember Janet Brecky. I won't take a lot of your time. You already have all my materials. I wanted to say something new, not just repeat for you what I have, proposed in the past. I think I want to use my time to just talk a little bit about, if this proposal were passed, what my vision is for how it would work and why it's necessary. How I see this working is, how it really would parallel, how it's done in the private sector in business. That what you would have is, the mayor doing really what he's done with his one program, working with his team of staff to come up with, the goals, the administrative goals for the city. And then the city council, kind of simultaneous along the same line, would be working on what are the goals of the city council, understanding that you've got 8 different elected officials, talking to 8 different constituent bodies, and they're bringing their goals forward. The city council would be the ones responsible for hiring the consultant, because the charter, if amended as I proposed, it would require them to be the leader in this function. And so they would hire the consultant would come in, likely work with both the mayor and the council together, and eventually you would have enough of a plan or a framework of a plan that you would take it out to the public, just like the school district did. The school district took it out to the public, and had public hearings on it and public testimony on, an outlined plan together. School district did it twice, 2 times out to the public and back. And then, ultimately you've got something, that the council and the mayor have come up with together, and then that would be, put on into or passed, through an ordinance. Their ordinance would set up a procedure for probably passing it by a resolution or an ordinance, similar to how we pass our capital improvement plan or how we pass our budget. And I would envision this process would be out in front of the capital improvement plan and the budget. So you'd have the policy goals driving the budget, because you'd have in place, for example, if the city as a body now, the city government as a body, the mayor and the city council together now have created this plan, and then they've decided that housing, which is the mayor's #1 goal for his plan, that is the #1 goal for the city. Well, then when the budget comes back through, now the city council is looking at that and we're going, well, we as a group, all of us, decided that, housing is our #1 item. And there's no funding for anything to do with it. Then the council has something to compare with when they study the budget and the CIP. They can now look at it and go, okay, these things that we said were important, that we agreed as a team were important, but they're not being budgeted properly. There's not financing for them. It's something that, the policy would then be driving, the budgetary and the CIP process, that we would have input on the front end. And so you're doing kind of a comparative analysis. In the current system, the way it's set up, the mayor's responsible for bringing the budget and the CIP forward, and the council gets this massive budget, and it's all done. And so it's been difficult, I think, for the council in the past to really have an impact on the budget or on the direction of the city. The charter makes it clear that this is the council's job, that they have all the policy setting powers of the government, of the body. And so I'm not asking you to add any powers. This does not shift any powers away from anybody or to anybody. It is in the charter that the council has the policy setting powers. So what you might be asking me is, well, if they have the policy setting powers already, then why are we, why aren't they just doing it? Well, the reality is because there's no structure in place, and there's no structure in place, like there is structure in place for the CIP and for the budget. It's in the charter. There's no structure in place to make that happen. And when I believe that is what's missing, and that's why they haven't done it. It's been, 25 years, and I showed you the 2 policy documents that we had. I mean, there's been a couple attempts, but they've never actually, done this. So I do view it as a place in the charter where something's missing, something that's missing that's created a situation where the council hasn't really risen up to its full potential. And, I'm just here as a council member now. I would come back at this as a citizen. I am in the unique position of having, implemented this charter. So when I came back and looked at it and wondered why there isn't some policy documents driving, the vision of the council, I saw that this was the piece that was missing. And I'm the only one that's raised this issue because I was in that unique position. And I thought, oh my goodness, that would fix it. That would fix it. So there would need to be ordinances that would implement this, but just a simple provision that actually makes the council do their job. And this, again, would be something be voted on by the people. Be brought out to the people and say, we want the council to, exercise its leadership role. And if they want to see really a good long-range strategic plan coming from the city, I think this would be the way to get that accomplished.
Thank you, Ms. Brecky. Questions for Ms. Brecky? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Further public input on formal recommendation number 12. Seeing none, discussion and/or action from the commission on formal recommendation number 12. Ms. Hayek?
Well, I applaud you for wanting us to implement and place this because it's, I know, strong in an issue that you would like to see happen. I have some real concerns about a two plans, a mayor's plan for the city and a council's plan for the city. As I know, I was a member of the council when you were the legal person embracing this. We were advised many times by you that this is a strong mayor form of government. And that's what the people wanted, and that's what they got. So I do know that the council has the power currently to do this if they should choose to. And the CIP is out there, they can have their input with that. I also have concerns about ever placing something in a document that has a lot of freedom. The council can do whatever they want, and I think when you start to put things in, then later on they'll wonder, well, we can't do it because it's not in the charter. And right now they have the authority and the power to do the master plan if that would be what they wanted to do. So I am reluctant and would not support placing this within the charter at this time.
Further discussion and/or action on formal recommendation number 12? Mr. Timian.
I certainly see that having a long-range strategic master plan for the city is very desirable and where it should be. The difficulty is by having it in the charter, I think it makes it more restrictive as to what is there and what is, haven't talked about what is the mayor's input in some of those items, but I think it would really be worthwhile for the mayor and the council to have a long-range strategic master plan. It makes perfect sense. The items that were presented from other communities were very well done as to how that works, and it's, I think, pulling everything together. It's a desirable objective, but I don't know if putting it in the charter is the best way to proceed. But thank you for bringing it forward, getting the attention it does, and I would certainly be in favor of the city having a strategic master plan.
Further discussion or action on formal recommendation number 12?
I will make a motion that we do not move forward with that. We reject that for inclusion on the ballot.
Right, there's been a motion to
There's been a
reject.
motion on that?
There's been a motion to reject formal recommendation number 12. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Politas seconds. Any further discussion on the motion to reject formal recommendation number 12? Mr. Zylstra.
Well, I think I'm going to vote against the motion to reject. The most persuasive argument, actually the arguments being made by my fellow commissioners are pretty weighty. And I would normally agree with that, except for something pointed out by Councilor Brecky at the last presentation, which is you could say the same thing about the CIP. It's in the capital improvement plan is in the charter. Why? I must admit, when we were going through, that struck me as, that seems a little strange that that's put in the charter. But that's getting close to a strategic plan. It's a strategic plan for capital. But that is separate, at present, it's separate from any other broader strategic plan. And so I think at least it's consistent enough with the charter, particularly because we already have a strategic capital plan mandated by the charter. I think it's consistent enough with that we could give the voters the opportunity to speak on it. So I will oppose the motion to reject.
Thank you, Mr. Zylstra. We have a motion and a second to reject formal recommendation number 12. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to reject formal recommendation number 12, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Formal recommendation number 12 is rejected. Item E under old business, list of formal recommendations for revision to the Sioux Falls Charter to be maintained. I want to quickly look at this list and make sure as a commission that we're satisfied that we have addressed all issues. An issue was raised as to number 6, plurality voting for election of a member of the City Council. That item shows that we simply declined action. I think in order for clarity of the record, it would probably be a good idea if at the final meeting we place on our agenda taking definitive action on the plurality voting item, either rejecting or placing on the ballot.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Hayek?
as we look at number 1, is that duplicative of 6?
There was, unfortunately, we invited Mr. Mathias multiple times to return and give us clarification on how he would propose wording his amendment on plurality voting. We don't know if it was duplicative or not.
Okay. So it was just rejected because he did not come back. So we weren't,
Yes.
thank you.
Would it be permissible to take action on item 6 today, so that when we have our next meeting, we can be final?
Since we've already had public input and had put it on our agenda, I suppose the chair would entertain a motion to take definitive action today on that item, since the public had a full and fair opportunity to comment on it, to offer input. Is there a motion to take definitive action on formal recommendation number 6?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Zoustra moves to reject formal recommendation number 6. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Hayek. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to reject formal recommendation number 6 signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Formal recommendation number 6 will be changed to indicate it was rejected by the Charter Revision Commission. That wraps up all of the items on our list of formal recommendations. I will turn it over to the City Attorney's Office for discussion of item F under Old Business. Clarification of duties of the Charter Revision Commission on its webpage. Thank you.
So what Carrie Hansel's passing out right now is a copy of the a printout of the website. And because the question was raised regarding duties, there's been some discussion throughout the year regarding the criteria and the process by which the commission determines what should be accepted or rejected and or passed or fail. And so basically what we did, follow that being raised, is in order to clarify that and ensure that that wasn't confusing in any way, is the line, and by the way, these documents have been placed for the public as well, but those 4 words, which it deems advisable, were deleted from the website when that was raised, so that there isn't any commentary in that regard other than just addressing the amendments to the charter, potential amendments.
Any questions or discussion on that clarification on the website? Mr. Zoustra.
Yeah, thank you very much. I looked at it and said, whoa, they already did it. But then I went to the next page, a sub-page, and I'm not sure you've made that consistent yet. So I would just say, look at each page. I checked that yet today, and I think the wording was on, if you click on duties, then when it comes up, and it's just the page on duties, I think those 4 words are still in there.
Okay, we'll take a look and get that.
And again, to clarify, I raised the issue because I think transparency and openness is what we need, and it was not consistent with the implementing ordinance, the authorizing ordinance, and I just thought perhaps it will be less confusing if they are. Thank you.
Any further discussion on item F under Old Business? Seeing none, we'll move to new business. One item of new business we need to discuss is scheduling our final meeting for January to review the ballot. Looking ahead, Wednesday, January 8th. Could everyone do a meeting at 3:30 or 4 p.m.? Mr. Timian?
I have another meeting that's going to be starting at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Yeah, we'll see this as being a fairly brief meeting.
Yes.
I could do a 3:30.
Okay.
I'm good. I picked the time. I'm fine.
Everyone else? All right. As long as you're sure, Mr. Timian, then I would propose we meet 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, January 8th. Any other new business? Seeing none. Is there an objection to opening the floor for public input. I would open the floor to public input, keeping in mind the time limits of 5 minutes for each item. Ms. Brecky.
I will be very brief. I was just going to say, I do expect to come back before you again, probably with the same amendment or a different variation of it, and I don't want to create the impression that I don't get it or I'm not listening to your determination. I will go back to the council. I will go back to the mayor. I'll try to work with them to develop this in ordinance. But even if we do get a full set of ordinances that actually establish a procedure for a long-range strategic master planning process, I still firmly believe that it needs to be in the charter permanently so that it's a part of the city's permanent functions. And I believe so for the very reasons that you stated. So I just wanted to say that in advance so that don't get upset with me when you see me back in the future. It's going to be a difficult job to convince my fellow council members that this is something that they want to do. I'm not sure it really is my job. Part of me sees me here more as a citizen and a former city attorney than as a council member because I happen to see that this wasn't being done and it needed to be done. So I will go back and do my very best, but it might not be something that I can convince them that's appropriate for them to do.
Ms. Brecky, I would certainly echo Mr. Zalstra's comments earlier. I would encourage you to return to this commission with this proposal. I think this is an issue which, to my earlier comments, is not a political one. I don't view you as, or anybody as having brought this strategic plan proposal forward for some kind of political agenda or based on past political decisions. I think the request that an item be placed on the ballot seeking to amend the charter to insert a mandate for the strategic plan has some merit, makes sense, is something that people can wrap their heads around. I think it goes without saying that I think everyone on the commission has said that they view this, or they agree with you that the city council currently has the authority to engage in a strategic plan if desired. The question is whether or not the charter should be amended to include a mandate that strategic planning take place. And I think that's the question right now. To the extent that some of the fellow city council members can come forward at future meetings when you bring that proposal again and discuss specific issues, and to the extent that you can, we appreciate you bringing forward an outline of possible ordinances that would implement the process for the mandate of the strategic plan would be very helpful to give my fellow commissioners and I some sense of how the process would work and what it would look like, so that we would know that we wouldn't just be asking the citizens to vote on the bare mandate without an idea of what it would look like in practicality. Ms. Hayek.
I do. What I would like to see is how this works if the mayor has a plan and then we have a strategic plan with the city council and all of a sudden they're butting heads. We have financial issues that they're fighting over, things are not getting funded. And you have made reference to the school board having a strategic plan. But the school board and the superintendent do not both have a strategic plan. There's one plan.
There would only be one strategic.
And that's the thing that I think is key, because we have the mayor setting out a plan. The council has the purse strings, essentially, to prove or not approve the budget. And I do understand that is a very difficult document to grab your arms around, especially as a new council member. So if there's a way that you can make this work so that we don't see a real fight between this is my plan and this is our plan, and somehow they're not working together. Because I think I have some concerns, and I know that you have the authority at this time to do, and I would encourage you to maybe do a strategic plan and show how good it is, and then that would, fuel the fire in terms of having us place it within the charter election.
I am on the same page with you. I do envision it as being a dovetailing of the administrative goals and then those broader policy goals that are coming in, again, to those 8 council members, are they hear things differently than what people in City Hall do. So I do see it ultimately ending up with a single plan that is, agreed to by the council and the mayor together, working as a team, working in tandem. And that is, to me, the beauty of it. And if we can achieve that, I do see it a very bright future, in implementing something like that for the city of Sioux Falls, and that becoming a practice, to just help us keep on top of our issues. I would say one thing, it's difficult for, again, I look at myself on the council, but I also stand back and look at it kind of as objectively, and it's difficult for my fellow council members because what they're doing and how they're doing it is it's always been done that way. So for me to come in from the outside and say, but we need to do this, it's a difficult sell because everything is just very comfortable being done the way it is, it's been done because it's been done this way for so many years. We've gone on without one that, it's far harder than I imagined when I was elected to convince them, because people just are comfortable with the status quo. Again, I will do my very best, but that often happens. I've seen that as well, that once people are elected and they're in their position and they're doing it a certain way, change is hard.
And I would add that it would help to see, maybe past council members, current council members, who would embrace this as a move in the right direction, and rather than having you here as an island saying it. So that would be really helpful.
And I do think that exists. Yeah.
To your point earlier, Ms. Brecky, I think your current proposed amendment does discuss a long-range strategic master plan. I would view this as, indicating that this would be the plan. I think to your further points about cooperation with the mayor and the city administration, it would be, for future consideration, could be an additional language of in cooperation with the city, cooperation with the mayor's office and the city administration, comma, the city council shall create and adopt, et cetera. I think that would go to Ms. Hayek's point a little more. I do think this is a discussion which is worth having, and I appreciate your time and energy put into this issue.
Thank you. I like that. Yeah.
Further public input? Any topics? Movie reviews? Any further input or discussion from the members of the commission? For my purposes, between now and our last meeting, I would just thank each of you for your service on the commission, for helping to, make my role as chairman really, really easy. You're great members, intelligent, asked very pressing or good questions. I also want to thank the members of the public who have been a part of this process, both coming forward to the meetings, posting their thoughts and views online as well about the Charter Revision Commission. I think that that's why this commission decided right at the beginning to have everything about this process be completely open and transparent, and for our structure for how formal recommendations would be listed and then brought to meetings no sooner than they'd been put on the agenda and whatnot, make sure that our public has an opportunity to participate. Anything further for the good of the order? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Hayek, seconded by Commissioner Politis to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.